They say that history is written by the victors. But sometimes, if you bleed enough, and if you die with enough precision, the defeated get to hold the pen. There is a narrow strip of land in Greece where the earth still smells of sulfur and rot. We know it as the site of the most famous suicide mission in human memory, the 300, the last stand. But the legend you know is a mask. It hides a much darker, more complex machine. This was not a story of impulsive heroism. It was a cold, calculated act of narrative warfare. It was a trap set by a king who knew that his death would be infinitely more dangerous than his life. We are often sold the golden myth of the Spartans, the glory, the red cloaks, the defiance. But tonight, we are going to look at the rust on the bronze. We are going to walk through the dust and the heat to understand why 7,000 men walked into a meat grinder, and why an emperor who commanded millions found himself defeated by a ghost. So settle in, pour a drink. Let's peel back the layers of 2,500 years of myth-making. It is time to walk the path to the hot gates. If you stand there today, the first thing you notice is the smell. It is a thick, rotten scent of sulfur that clings to the back of the throat and refuses to leave. Steam rises from the earth, drifting across the narrow coastal road like ghosts looking for a place to rest. The locals call this place the Hot Gates. In the ancient tongue, it is Thermopylae. To the naked eye, there is nothing grand about this geography. It is a jagged, uncomfortable scar of land. On one side, the sheer, unforgiving face of Mount Kallidromos rises straight up into the gray sky, a wall of limestone and scrub brush that no army can march over. On the other side, the Malian Gulf, a cold, restless body of water that swallows the shoreline. Between the mountain and the sea, there is a path. In the year 480 before the Common Era, this path was incredibly narrow. In some places, it was barely wide enough for a single wagon to pass without the wheels scraping the rock. It is a claustrophobic place. The air feels heavy, trapped between the heat of the springs and the chill of the sea wind. It is a place that feels unfinished, as if the gods simply stopped working on this corner of the world. And yet, this mundane, stinking strip of mud and rock was about to become the anvil upon which the history of the West would be hammered into shape. It is early autumn. The wheat in the fields of central Greece is golden and ready for harvest. But the farmers are not looking at the crops. They are looking north. They are looking at the dust on the horizon. It is a dust cloud so vast it changes the color of the sunset. It is not a storm. It is a migration. To understand why this specific pass became the most famous killing ground in human memory, we cannot start with the Spartans. We cannot start with the shields or the spears or the red cloaks. We must start with the rage. We must go back 10 years to a different shoreline and a different failure. The year was 490 BCE. The place was Marathon, the Persian Empire. The Achaemenid dynasty, the superpower of the ancient world, had reached out its hand to crush the irritating city-state of Athens. They expected submission. They expected the Greeks to look at the sheer scale of Persian power and bow their heads. Instead, on the beach at Marathon, the Athenians charged. They ran into the aerostorm. They broke the Persian line. They pushed the invaders back into the sea. For the Greeks, Marathon was a miracle, a proof of concept that free men could defeat slaves. But in the Persian capital of Susa, thousands of miles to the east, Marathon was not a military catastrophe. It was a statistical error. It was a gnat biting a lion. Darius, the great king, the king of kings, did not view this defeat as a reason to retreat. He viewed it as an insult to the cosmic order. The Persian kings believed they were appointed by Ahura Mazda to bring truth and order to a chaotic world. Resistance was not just war, it was heresy. It was a lie that needed to be corrected. And so, a ritual began in the court of the king. Every night, as Darius sat down to dinner, surrounded by gold leaf and lapis lazuli, a servant was instructed to stand by his ear. This servant had one job. He would lean in and whisper 3 words, "Master, remember the Athenians." Night after night, month after month, remember the Athenians. The grudge was cultivated like a poisonous plant. It was watered with pride and fed with the resources of the largest empire the world had ever seen. But Darius would not live to see the correction. The burden of revenge, the weight of this narrative warfare, fell to his son, Xerxes. Xerxes was a man who did not just inherit a throne. He inherited a ghost. He stepped into a world where his legitimacy depended on finishing what his father had started. But Xerxes was not content to simply repeat the past. He was a man of the spectacular. He did not want to conquer Greece. He wanted to overwhelm it. He wanted to turn the invasion into a piece of theater so terrifying that no one would ever dare raise a shield against Persia again. This is where the arithmetic of empire begins to spiral into madness. To march an army from Asia into Europe, Xerxes had to do the impossible. He had to bridge the Hellespont, the narrow strait of turbulent water separating the continents. This was not a job for soldiers, it was a job for engineers. They lined up hundreds of ships, triremes and pentaconters, anchoring them nose to tail against the current. They laid thick cables of flax and papyrus across the decks, tightening them with massive wooden winches until they hummed like the strings of a lyre. Upon these cables, they laid planks, then brush, then earth. They trod the dirt down until it felt like a road. They built a floating highway across the ocean. But the water is a chaotic element. A storm rose up, twisting the ships, snapping the cables, and scattering the bridge into driftwood. When the news reached Xerxes, he did not act like a general. He acted like a god who had been disobeyed. He ordered the engineers beheaded, a simple, brutal administrative decision. But then, he turned his wrath on the water itself. He ordered his soldiers to drag iron chains to the shore. He ordered them to whip the sea. 300 lashes for the Hellespont. As the soldiers struck the waves, they shouted the king's words at the foam. "O bitter water, your master inflicts this punishment upon you because you have wronged him." It creates a chilling image. The most powerful man on earth, standing on the shore, commanding nature to submit to his will. It was madness, perhaps, but it was also a message. If the king holds dominion over the tides, what chance does a Spartan stand? The second bridge held, and the army began to move. Herodotus, the historian who would later chronicle these events with a mix of awe and exaggeration, tells us the army was so large it drank rivers dry. He claims there were millions. Modern historians, looking at the logistics of water and grain, suggest the number was closer to 200,000, perhaps 300,000 combatants, with an equal number of camp followers. Even at a conservative estimate, it was a moving nation. It was a machine of war that stretched for miles. Regiments of Assyrians with bronze helmets, Indians clad in cotton, Caspians in goatskin cloaks, Ethiopians painted half red and half white with leopard skins draped over their shoulders. And at the center, the immortals. 10,000 elite shock troops, chosen for their height and perfection. Whenever one fell, another immediately took his place, so the number never dipped below 10,000. They wore gold beneath their robes. They glittered as they marched. This was the beast moving west. A slow, grinding inevitability. It moved through Thrace, through Macedonia, demanding earth and water, the tokens of submission. Most cities gave them. To refuse was suicide. The sheer noise of the army, the tramping of feet, the creaking of wagon wheels, the lowing of oxen, the thousands of languages mixing in the air, would have been a low-frequency rumble felt through the soles of the feet long before the banners came into view. And down in the south, in the jagged, militaristic heart of the Peloponnese, a different kind of machine was waking up. Sparta was not a city in the traditional sense. It had no great walls. It had no towering temples filled with gold. The Spartans liked to say that their walls were their men, and their borders were the tips of their spears. It was a society engineered for a single purpose, the production of violence. At the head of this society stood Leonidas. History often paints Leonidas as a young, vibrant hero, a man in the prime of his life. But in 480 BCE, Leonidas was a man in his 50s. He was an old lion. His beard would have been streaked with gray, and perhaps most importantly, he was never supposed to be king. He was the third son. In the Spartan system of succession, the third son is spare parts. Because he was not the heir, he was not exempt from the agoge, the brutal, state-sponsored training program that turned boys into weapons. Imagine a childhood defined by hunger. The boys were underfed on purpose to force them to steal. If they were caught stealing, they were beaten, not for the theft, but for the clumsiness of getting caught. They were given one cloak to last the entire year, winter and summer. They slept on beds of reeds they plucked from the riverbanks with their bare hands. They were taught that pain is information, nothing more. They were taught to kill without hesitation and to die without complaint. Leonidas survived this. He lived in the barracks. He ate the black broth, pork boiled in blood, vinegar, and salt. He learned to march in silence, to keep his shield locked with his neighbors, to become part of the phalanx. He was not raised to rule. He was raised to obey. But fate is a tricky author. His older brothers died, one in a fit of madness, another before he could produce a male heir. And so, late in life, the crown fell to Leonidas. He ascended to the dual kingship of Sparta, for they always had two kings, carrying the scars of the common soldier. He understood the men he led because he had been one of them. He knew the weight of the shield. He knew the texture of fear and how to strangle it. When the news of the Persian advance reached Sparta, the city was paralyzed. It was the season of the Carneia, a holy festival in honor of Apollo. Spartan law was rigid, terrifyingly so. To march to war during the Carneia was to risk the wrath of the gods. It was sacrilege. The ephors, the elderly overseers of Spartan law, debated and argued. To march was to break the law. To stay was to allow the barbarian to reach their doorstep. In moments of impossible choice, the Greeks turned to the divine. They sent envoys to Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi was the center of the Greek spiritual world. A temple complex clinging to the side of Mount Parnassus, where the air is thin and cold. Inside the sanctuary, the Pythia, the high priestess, sat on a tripod over a fissure in the rock. Vapors rose from the earth, ethylene perhaps, or something geologically potent, sending her into a trance. She spoke in riddles, her voice distorted, her words transcribed by priests into hexameter verse. The envoys from Sparta stood in the shadows, waiting for the verdict. The Pythia's voice, when it came, was not a comfort. It was a death sentence. Here is your fate, O dwellers of Sparta of the wide spaces. Either your great and glorious city must be wasted by Persian men, or the limit of Lacedaemon must mourn a dead king from the line of Heracles. The arithmetic of the gods was cold. The city or the king. One must die so the other could live. When this message was brought back to Leonidas, he did not rage against it. He was a product of the agoge. He understood duty. If the price of Sparta's survival was his own breath, that was a transaction he was willing to make. In fact, it simplified things. He was not going north to win. He was not going north to conquer. He was going north to fulfill a contract. But he could not take the army. The Carnea forbade it. The full might of Sparta had to stay home and pray. So Leonidas proposed a loophole. He would take an advance guard, a small force to hold the pass at Thermopylae, to act as a bottleneck, to buy time for the rest of Greece to assemble once the festival was over. He selected his men carefully. We all know the number, 300. But it was not just any 300. He chose only men who had living sons, men whose bloodlines were secured. If they died, their family names would continue. This was an admission of intent. You do not select men with heirs for a patrol. You select them for a sacrifice. Imagine the scene in Sparta as they prepared to leave. There were no weeping wives clinging to ankles. Spartan women were as hard as the iron their husbands carried. The famous saying, "with this shield or on it," was not a poetic invention. It was a domestic expectation. Come back victorious, or come back dead. There is no third option. But the 300 were not alone. This is the part of the story that often fades into the background, eclipsed by the bright red of the Spartan cloaks. As Leonidas marched north, he collected allies. He was the nucleus, the gravity that pulled others into the orbit of his suicide mission. From the city of Thespia, 700 men volunteered. Thespia was not a warrior state like Sparta. These were citizens, landowners, artists. They knew the odds. They went anyway. From Thebes, 400 men joined, though their loyalty was suspect. Thebes was known to be wavering, considering submission to Persia. Leonidas took them perhaps as hostages, or perhaps to force them to bleed for Greece so they couldn't betray it later. From Arcadia, from Phocis, from Locris, contingents arrived. And let us not forget the Helots, the Spartan slaves. Lightly armed, carrying the supplies, tending the horses. They marched too. They would die too. By the time the coalition reached the hot gates, they numbered not 300, but perhaps 5, maybe 7,000 men. 7,000 against millions. The odds were still suicidal, but it was an army. They marched through the rugged terrain of central Greece, the heat beating down on their bronze breastplates. The sound of their march would have been a rhythmic clanking, the heavy hoplite shields bumping against greaves. Leonidas walked at the front. He knew the prophecy. He knew the logic. He was walking toward his own funeral, and he was dragging 7,000 men with him. As they approached Thermopylae, the geography began to tighten. The mountains closed in. The sea crept closer. They arrived at the middle gate, the narrowest point of the pass. Here, an old Phocian wall, built centuries ago to stop minor raids, lay in ruins. It was little more than a heap of stones, knee-high, overgrown with weeds. Leonidas looked at the wall. He looked at the mountain towering above, the trackless vertical slopes of Mount Kallidromos. He looked at the steam rising from the hot springs. "Rebuild the wall," he ordered. The men set to work. They lifted the heavy limestone rocks, stacking them, patching the gaps. It was hard, manual labor. They were not just building a fortification. They were building a stage. This wall would be the line, the physical manifestation of no further. While they worked, scouts came running back from the north. Their eyes were wide. They had seen the enemy. "The fires!" one scout reported, breathless. "At night, their campfires are more numerous than the stars." Another scout spoke of the water. "They have drunk the rivers dry. The Sparkeos River is a trickle of mud." Fear began to ripple through the allied ranks. The Peloponnesians, the men from the south, began to mutter. They wanted to retreat to the Isthmus of Corinth, to build a wall across the narrow neck of land that protected their home cities and abandon central Greece to the fire. They wanted to hide behind geography that favored them. Leonidas listened to their panic. He stood calm in the center of the debate. He knew that if they retreated to the Isthmus, Athens would burn. The coalition would shatter. The war would be lost before a single spear was thrown. "We stay," Leonidas said. His voice would have been the flat monotone of a man who has already accepted the end. "We stay here. We make them fight us where their numbers mean nothing." He sent messengers south, to the cities that were still celebrating their festivals, pleading for reinforcements. "The barbarian is at the gates," the message read. "Send everything you have." But for now, there were only the 7,000. They took their positions behind the rebuilt wall. They unpacked their shields. They sharpened their spears. The Spartans oiled their long hair and combed it, a ritual of preparation for death. They wanted to look beautiful for the underworld. And then, the sound began. It wasn't a trumpet. It wasn't a shout. It was a vibration. The ground began to tremble. The water in the hot springs rippled. The Persian vanguard appeared around the bend of the coast. They didn't surge forward. They poured. Like a dark liquid spilling over the edge of a table, they filled the valley floor. First hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. The horizon vanished, replaced by a forest of spear tips and banners. The Greeks stood behind their low wall, silent. The steam twisted around their legs. The smell of sulfur was overpowering. Xerxes had arrived. The machine had reached the bottleneck. The King of Kings set up his throne on a hill overlooking the pass, a golden throne with a canopy to shield him from the sun. He sat down to watch the inevitable. He expected the Greeks to see his army and simply evaporate. He expected them to run. It was the only rational response. He waited. 4 days passed. This is the agonizing pause that defines the beginning of the conflict. It is a psychological siege. Xerxes waited because he could not believe what he was seeing. A handful of men, standing in the open, doing calisthenics, combing their hair, ignoring the apocalypse sitting on their doorstep. He sent a mounted scout to ride up to the Greek line. The scout rode close enough to see the faces of the Spartans. He saw them cleaning their armor. He saw them exercising naked. They didn't even look up at him. They ignored him completely. To the Spartans, the scout was nothing. He wasn't a threat. He was scenery. The scout rode back to Xerxes and reported this madness. "They are grooming themselves, Majesty." Xerxes laughed. But Demaratus, an exiled Spartan king who lived in the Persian court, a man who knew his own people, did not laugh. He stood by the throne, his face grave. "Do not mistake this for vanity, my king," Demaratus warned. "It is a custom. When the Spartans prepare to risk their lives, they dress their hair. These men are not posing. They are preparing to kill and to die. You are looking at the finest soldiers in the world, and they have chosen their ground." Xerxes dismissed the warning. He was a man of logic, and this defied logic. Why would they die for a strip of dirt? Why would they die when he could offer them riches, positions of power, life? He decided to offer them a chance. He sent a herald to the wall. The herald stood before the silent phalanx, the mass of bronze and muscle. "Spartans!" the herald shouted, his voice echoing off the cliffs. "Lay down your weapons!" The great King Xerxes is merciful. He will grant you your lives. He will make you satraps of Greece. Just surrender your arms." Leonidas stood at the front. He did not shout. He did not make a speech. He simply looked at the herald. He looked at the millions of men behind him. And he spoke 2 words in the Doric dialect. 2 words that would be carved into stone and flesh for the next 2,500 years. Molon labe. Come and take them. It was not a challenge. It was an invitation. It was a statement of fact. If you want these spears, you will have to pull them out of our hands. And the only way to do that is to kill us. The herald rode back. The answer was delivered to the golden throne. The sun began to set on the 4th day. The waiting was over. The arithmetic of empire had met the stone wall of duty. The grand ambition was about to crash into the pass that should not matter. Xerxes raised his hand. The drums began to beat. A low, rhythmic thumping that sounded like the heartbeat of a dying giant. The grand ambition was over. The reality of the machine was about to begin. The sun rises on the 5th day. The waiting is over. The silence that had stretched across the pass like a taut wire finally snaps. From the Persian line, a horn blasts, a low, mournful sound that seems to vibrate in the teeth. And then, the arrows come. They do not come as individual missiles. They come as a weather event. The sky, which had been a pale early morning blue, suddenly darkens. Thousands of reed arrows, tipped with iron, arc over the battlefield. It is a sound like heavy rain on a tin roof as they strike the ground, the rocks, and the bronze facings of the Greek shields. Clack, 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 clack. The Spartans do not flinch. They do not crouch. They simply angle their shields, creating a sloped roof of bronze and oak. The arrows shatter harmlessly. The Persian archers are firing from too far away, and their bows are designed for the unarmored flesh of eastern tribes, not the heavy panoply of the hoplite. Xerxes watches from his high throne. He is not worried. This is just the opening ceremony. He waves a hand, and the first wave of infantry begins to move. He does not send his own people, the Persians, first. He sends the Medes and the Scythians. These are brave men, fierce warriors from the Zagros Mountains. They run forward, shouting, eager to claim the reward the king has promised for the head of a Greek. They are lightly armored, wearing trousers and tunics, carrying wicker shields and short spears. They are fast. They rely on mobility. But Thermopylae is a place where mobility goes to die. As the Medes crash into the Greek line, the physics of the battle immediately assert themselves. The pass is a funnel. The massive width of the Persian army is compressed into a frontage of only a few dozen meters. The thousands behind the front line cannot fight. They can only push. And they push their own comrades onto the Greek spears. The Greek phalanx is a machine designed for exactly this moment. It is a wall of overlapping shields, locked rim to rim. Bristling from this wall are the doru, 8-foot spears with leaf-shaped iron heads. The Medes run into a hedge of sharp iron. The sound of the impact is sickening. It is the sound of metal punching through soft linen and flesh. The front rank of the Medes is annihilated in seconds. But they cannot retreat. The pressure from behind is relentless. The second rank is shoved over the bodies of the first, right onto the spears. For the Greeks, this is grueling mechanical labor. It is not dueling. There is no room to swing a sword. It is a rhythm of brace, thrust, recover. Brace, thrust, recover. The heat inside the bronze helmets begins to rise. The smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, blood, and bowels becomes trapped in the narrow space. The Spartans, standing in the front rows, work in silence. They do not shout insults. They conserve their breath. They kill with an efficiency that is almost industrial. When a spear shaft breaks, they draw their xiphos, the short, leaf-shaped sword, and step closer. Now it is stabbing work. Close. Intimate. The pile of Persian dead begins to rise. It becomes an obstacle. The Medes are tripping over their own fallen. The ground turns into a slurry of red mud. Xerxes stands up from his throne. Herodotus tells us that 3 times during the battle, the great king leaped from his seat in terror for his army. He cannot understand what he is seeing. His men are not fighting an army, they are fighting a meat grinder. The Greeks are not getting tired. They are rotating their lines. When the front rank is exhausted, a whistle blows, the shields open for a fraction of a second, and fresh men step forward while the tired ones step back to breathe and drink water. The phalanx breathes, in and out. By the afternoon, the Medes are broken. They pull back, leaving a carpet of bodies in the dust. The Greek casualties are negligible, a few scratches, a few bruises. The sun is high now. The heat is oppressive. The flies have already found the dead. Xerxes is furious. He feels humiliated. He decides to end this farce. He orders the withdrawal of the battered Medes and signals to his reserves. A hush falls over the Persian army. The ranks part. Walking through the center of the host come the immortals. They are the 10,000. The hand-picked elite. The personal guard of the king. They move in perfect unison, their feet striking the earth as one. They wear tiaras of cloth, fish-scale armor made of gold and iron beneath their colorful robes. They carry wicker shields, bows, and short spears with silver pomegranates acting as counterweights on the butt end. They are silent. They are terrifying. They are the weapon that has conquered the known world. The Greeks watch them come. The Spartans in the front line tighten their grip on their shield handles. This is the real test. The immortals charge. They do not scream like the Medes. They attack with discipline. They try to find gaps in the shield wall. They try to use their numbers to flank. But the mountain and the sea refuse to move. The immortals are forced into a head-on collision with the heavy bronze wall. And here, the technology gap becomes a chasm. The immortal spears are shorter than the Greek doru. To strike a Spartan, an immortal has to step inside the killing range of the Greek spear. Before he can even thrust his weapon, he is impaled. Their wicker shields, designed to stop arrows, disintegrate under the heavy blows of the Greek wood and iron. The carnage is horrific. The gold-embroidered robes of the immortals turn black with blood. But they are disciplined. They do not break. They keep coming, stepping over the bodies of the brothers who fell seconds before them. Then, the Spartans unveil their masterpiece. It is a maneuver they have practiced on the dusty plains of Laconia since they were children. At a signal, the Spartan line suddenly wavers. They turn their backs. They break formation. They run away. A roar goes up from the immortals. They are broken. The Greeks are fleeing. The discipline of the Persians snaps. The lust for the kill takes over. They break their own ranks, sprinting forward, screaming, a disorganized mob chasing a terrified prey. But the Spartans are not terrified. They are counting steps. Suddenly, the fleeing Spartans spin around. The transition is instantaneous. In a heartbeat, the disorganized mob of Persians runs face first into a perfectly formed, re-solidified shield wall. It is a slaughter. The immortals are caught out of formation, off balance, their momentum used against them. The Spartans cut them down by the hundreds. From his throne, Xerxes watches his best men die. He watches the myth of Persian invincibility shatter against a wall of Spartan bronze. The immortals are not gods. They are men, and they are dying just as easily as the Medes. Night falls on the 5th day. The fighting stops. The battlefield is a landscape of horror. The silence returns, but now it is the silence of the grave. The Greeks retreat behind their wall to eat and rest. They are exhausted, their arms heavy, their muscles cramping. But their morale is iron. They have held the door. In the Persian camp, the mood is funereal. The king is in a state of shock. The arithmetic of empire has failed. He has the numbers, but numbers are useless if they cannot be brought to bear. He is checkmated by geography. The next day, the 6th day, follows the same pattern. Xerxes tries again. He assumes the Greeks must be worn down by the sheer physical exertion of the slaughter. He sends fresh troops. He sends more detachments of the immortals. The result is the same. The pass is choked with the dead. The Greeks are fighting with a grim, rhythmic consistency. They are not just holding, they are winning. Xerxes retires to his tent. He is distraught. He begins to wonder if he will have to pack up his massive army and go home in shame. The greatest invasion in history is being stopped by a traffic jam. But history rarely turns on the strength of armies. It turns on the weakness of individuals. As the king sits in his tent, contemplating defeat, his guards bring in a man. He is a local, a Greek from the region of Malis. He is not a soldier. He is a man who knows the hills. He has mud on his boots and a look of hungry desperation in his eyes. His name is Ephialtes. In the Greek language, the word Ephialtes would later come to mean nightmare. It is a fitting legacy. Ephialtes does not care about Greek freedom. He does not care about the Spartans or the Athenians or the concept of the citizen. He cares about gold. He sees a stalemate, and he sees an opportunity to sell the key that will unlock it. He kneels before the great king. "Lord," he says, his voice trembling, perhaps not with fear but with greed. "The pass cannot be taken from the front. You have seen this, but there is another way." Xerxes leans forward. The entire war hangs on the next sentence. "There is a path," Ephialtes whispers. "The Anapaea path. It starts near the Asopus River, climbs through the oak forests, runs along the spine of the mountain, and comes down behind the wall." Silence fills the tent. It is the silence of a lock clicking open. Xerxes looks at this small, treacherous man. He promises him gold. He promises him women, land, power. Ephialtes nods. The transaction is made. The West is sold for a pouch of coins. Xerxes wastes no time. He summons Hydarnes, the commander of the immortals. He orders him to take what remains of the 10,000, the ones who survived the slaughter of the previous 2 days. "Go tonight," Xerxes commands. "Follow this man. Encircle them. By tomorrow morning, I want them crushed." The sun sets. The moon rises. It is a clear, bright night. High in the mountains, the air is cool. The Anapaea path is narrow, winding through thick forests of oak trees. The ground is covered in dry, fallen leaves. Hydarnes and the immortals begin the climb. They strip off their heavy armor to move quietly, but 10,000 men cannot move in total silence. The sound of their feet on the dry leaves sounds like the rustling of the wind. Swish, swish, swish. Leonidas, in his wisdom, had foreseen this danger. He knew the path existed. He had stationed a contingent of 1,000 Phocians, local Greeks, to guard this back door. They were stationed in a clearing near the summit, tasked with stopping any flanking maneuver. But the Phocians were not Spartans. In the dead of night, The Phocians hear the rustling. It grows louder. It sounds like a river of leaves flowing uphill. They scramble for their weapons. The Persians burst out of the tree line. They are surprised to see the Greeks. They expected the path to be unguarded. Hydarnes pauses, fearing these might be Spartans. He asks Ephialtes. "No," the traitor says, "they are Phocians." Hydarnes laughs. He orders his archers to fire. A volley of arrows flies into the Phocian ranks. The Phocians, panicked, thinking the main attack is directed at them, make a fatal error. Instead of holding the path, they retreat to a higher crest of the mountain to make a last stand. They prepare to die fighting. But Hydarnes has no interest in fighting them. He ignores them completely. As soon as the Phocians move out of the way, the Persians simply march past them. They pour down the backside of the mountain. The door is open. The trap is set. Down in the pass, in the Greek camp, it is the darkest part of the night. The fires are burning low. The men are sleeping the sleep of the exhausted. Leonidas is awake. Perhaps he is watching the stars. Perhaps he is cleaning his sword. A runner arrives. Not a scout, but a deserter from the Persian camp. Or perhaps a local shepherd who saw the torches on the mountain. The message is breathless, terrified. "They are on the mountain. They have taken the path." Leonidas looks at the runner. He does not scream. He does not weep. He looks at the mountain, looming black against the stars. He can almost feel the weight of the thousands of Persians descending the other side. The prophecy is no longer a riddle. It is a schedule. The city or the king. He summons the commanders. The council at dawn is about to begin. The fighting, the real fighting, the fighting for hope, is over. Now, the fighting for meaning begins. The machine has found a way around the wall. The reality of the war has shifted from a defense to a funeral. Leonidas looks at his men. He looks at the dawn light beginning to bleed into the sky in the east. "Eat a good breakfast, men," he is said to have told them. "For tonight, we dine in Hades." The crisis has arrived. The light of the seventh day is gray and watery. It filters through the morning mist, illuminating a camp that is already packing up. The news of the encirclement has shattered the coalition. The mood in the Greek camp is not panic. It is a strange, hollow resignation. The men know the geography. They know that behind them, descending through the oak forests like a slow poison, are 10,000 Persians. In front of them, the entire landmass of Asia waits to surge forward. They are in a bottle, and the cork is being pushed down. Leonidas calls the final council. It is a brief affair. There are no maps to study, no tactics to debate. The strategic situation has simplified itself into a binary choice. Leave now and live, or stay here and die. The Allied commanders look at Leonidas. They look at the dust rising in the rear, where the immortals are closing the trap. Most of them argue for withdrawal. They say it makes no sense to throw away 7,000 lives for a position that is already lost. They say they should fall back, regroup, and fight again at the isthmus or in their own cities. Leonidas listens. He does not argue. He nods. He orders them to go. "Go," he says. "Save yourselves. Save the armies of your cities. Greece will need you later." He dismisses them. It is an act of mercy, but also an act of calculation. If the entire force dies here, today, the morale of the Greek world dies with them. But if these men return home, they carry the story. They become the witnesses. The allies pack their gear. They march away, heads down, moving fast to escape the closing jaws of the Persian trap. The sound of their retreat, the fading tramp of thousands of feet, leaves a sudden, heavy silence in the pass. But not everyone leaves. This is the moment where the popular myth often obscures the messy, human reality. We talk of the 300. We picture a small knot of red cloaks standing alone against the tide. But Leonidas does not stand alone. 700 Thespians refuse to leave. Their commander, Demophilus, looks at the king. The Thespians are not Spartans. They have no laws commanding them to die. They have no oracle promising that their death will save their city. They are free men. They can walk away, and no one would blame them. But they stay. Why? Perhaps because they understand that a sacrifice only matters if it is shared. Perhaps they refuse to let the Spartans hold the monopoly on glory. Or perhaps, simply, they cannot bear to walk away from brave men who are about to die. 400 Thebans stay as well, though history suggests their presence was less voluntary, kept perhaps as insurance, or perhaps caught by their own pride. And the Helots, the Spartan slaves. Let us not scrub them from the record. They are there, holding the spare spears, standing in the shadow of their masters. They will bleed the same red blood on the same black rocks. So, as the sun climbs higher, burning off the mist, about 1,500 men remain. They watch the rear of the column disappear. They are alone now. The world has shrunk to a few hundred yards of dirt, a crumbling wall, and the sound of the sea. Xerxes waits. He is giving the immortals time to complete their descent from the mountain. He pours a libation to the rising sun. He checks the position of the sun in the sky. He waits until the time of the filling of the market, mid-morning. Then the drums begin. This time, the sound is different. It is not the probing rhythm of the first days. It is a finale. In the Greek lines, Leonidas does something unexpected. For days he has fought defensively. He has kept his men behind the Phocian wall, using the bottleneck to nullify the Persian numbers. But defense is for those who hope to survive. Leonidas is done with survival. He orders the men forward. Out, he signals. Into the open. The phalanx marches out from behind the protection of the wall. They advance into the wider part of the pass. This is suicide. It exposes their flanks. It allows the Persians to wrap around. But Leonidas is not trying to hold ground anymore. He is trying to kill as many enemies as possible before the end. He is turning the battle into a brawl. They crash into the Persian front line. The impact is catastrophic. The Greeks are fighting with a maniacal, liberated energy. They know there is no tomorrow, so they spend every ounce of strength they have today. They shove the Persians backward. They drive them into the sea. They trample them into the mud. The Persian commanders behind the lines crack whips, lashing their own men, forcing them forward onto the Greek spears. The pressure is immense. The wooden shafts of the Greek spears begin to shatter. The wood cannot take the strain of so much impact. The spears break. The Greeks do not stop. They draw their swords. They step closer. In the swirling dust and noise, Leonidas fights. We can imagine him, an old man with the strength of a lifetime of warfare, swinging his blade, his shield battering the faces of the enemy. And then he falls. It is not a cinematic death. There is no final speech. An arrow or a spear thrust finds him. The king hits the ground. In the ancient world, the body of a king is a totem. It is a symbol of the army's soul. If the Persians take the body, they take the victory. They can mount his head on a spike. They can parade him as a trophy. The Spartans see their king fall. A roar goes up, a sound of pure animal grief and rage. They rush forward. They straddle the corpse. The battle shrinks down to this single point. The Persians see the prize. They surge in. 2 of Xerxes' own brothers are killed in the crush, cut down as they try to grab Leonidas's legs. The Spartans push them back. They are fighting not for territory, but for dignity. They heave the Persians away with their shields. They hack at grasping hands. Once, twice, 3 times, the Persians surge forward to drag the body away. 3 times, the Spartans repulse them, standing on top of the dead to protect the dead. They manage to drag Leonidas back. They have the body, but they have nothing else. From the rear, a new sound cuts through the din. The immortals have arrived. They are coming down from the mountain pass, closing the back door. The Greeks are surrounded. The remaining survivors, the Spartans, the Thespians, the few remaining Helots, make one last move. They stagger back, retreating behind the wall, past the wall, to a small hillock. A mound of earth and rock known as Kolonos Hill. They form a circle. It is a small, jagged ring of battered bronze. Their spears are gone. Their swords are notched or broken. Herodotus writes, with chilling simplicity, that they fought with swords, if they still had them, and if not, with hands and teeth. This is the devolution of war. It is no longer a phalanx. It is men tearing at their enemies with their fingernails, biting throats, fighting with rocks. It is primal. It is the refusal to stop being dangerous, even when you are disarmed. The Persians stop. They have the numbers to rush the hill. They could swamp the few hundred survivors in a wave of bodies. But they are afraid. They have seen what these men do in close quarters. They have seen them fight like demons over a dead king. The Persians do not want to step into that circle. So they pull back. Xerxes gives the order. There is no need to sacrifice more men. Arrows, he commands. The Persian archers line up. Thousands of them. They surround the hill from every angle. They lift their bows. The sky goes dark one last time. The Greeks on the hill cluster together. They do not raise their shields to block the arrows. There are too many, coming from too many directions. They simply stand, or they kneel next to the body of Leonidas. The arrows fall. It is a mechanical execution, wave after wave. The bronze armor is pierced. The flesh is torn. The Thespians die. The Spartans die. The Helots die. The silence returns to the pass, heavy and absolute. The hill is covered. It looks less like a battlefield and more like a pincushion, a mound of quills. It is over. Xerxes comes down from his throne. He walks across the battlefield. He has to step carefully. The ground is a carpet of his own dead. He walks past the wall. He climbs the small hill. He stands over the heap of bodies. He finds Leonidas. The King of Kings is shaking. He is the victor. He has opened the gate to Greece. The road to Athens is clear. But he does not feel like a winner. He feels like a man who has been bitten by a snake. He killed the snake, but the poison is already in his blood. He looks down at the body of the Spartan king, the man who defied him, the man who made him look weak. Xerxes breaks a taboo of the Persian culture. Persians respect the valiant dead. They honor bravery. But Xerxes is too angry for honor. The rage consumes him. Cut off his head, Xerxes orders, and put it on a stake. It is a petty act, an act of frustration. It is the act of a man trying to regain control over a story that has slipped out of his hands. By desecrating the body, he hopes to break the spell. He hopes to show the world that Leonidas was just a piece of meat. But he is wrong. As the Persian army begins to reorganize, as the engineers start to clear the road of the thousands of corpses, A feeling settles over the troops. They are quiet. They do not cheer. They look at the small hill with a sense of dread. They know the arithmetic has changed. Before Thermopylae, the Persians believed they were inevitable. They believed resistance was futile. Now, they know the truth. They know that every inch of Greek soil will have to be purchased with rivers of blood. They know that if 3 days cost them 20,000 men, the conquest of a whole nation will cost them everything. Xerxes has won the pass, but he has lost the psychological war. He stands on the hot gates, the smell of sulfur and death in his nose, and he looks south toward Athens. He thinks he is marching toward victory. He does not realize he is marching into a trap that Leonidas set the moment he chose to die. The battle is done. The legend is just beginning to breathe. Bad news travels faster than an army. Long before the Persian host could reorganize and march south, the story of what happened at the hot gates was already racing down the coast. It was carried by the few allies who had been dismissed by Leonidas before the end. It was carried by runners, their lungs burning, sprinting from city to city. They did not bring news of a victory. They brought news of a massacre. But they also brought something else, a detail, a specific image that hooked into the Greek imagination and refused to let go. They told of how the Spartans died. They told of the silence. They told of the broken spears and the teeth. When this news reached Athens, it should have caused panic. Athens was next. The road was open. There was nothing standing between the great king and the Acropolis. But instead of panic, the news brought a strange, cold clarity. Themistocles, the Athenian leader, a man as cunning as Leonidas was stubborn, understood what the sacrifice had bought him. It hadn't bought him safety. It had bought him time. And more importantly, it had bought him a moral mandate. Because the Spartans had died, no one else could surrender with honor. The debt had been established. Themistocles ordered the evacuation of Athens. The city was abandoned. The women and children were sent to safety across the water. The men boarded the wooden ships, the triremes. They gave up their land. They gave up their temples. They allowed the Persians to burn their city to the ground. Xerxes arrived in Athens and found it empty. He burned the Acropolis. He sat amidst the smoke of the temples, thinking he had won. But he was fighting a ghost. The city was not the buildings. The city was the men. And the men were floating on the sea, waiting. They were waiting in the Straits of Salamis. It is a mere image of Thermopylae. Another narrow place. Another bottleneck. But this time, the battlefield is water. Weeks after the slaughter at the pass, the Persian navy sailed into the trap. They rowed into the narrow channel between the island of Salamis and the mainland. They expected the Greeks to flee. But the Greeks were possessed. They were rowing with the memory of the 300 screaming in their minds. The shout that went up from the Greek fleet was recorded by the playwright Aeschylus, who was there, pulling an oar. "O sons of the Greeks, go, liberate your country. Liberate your children, your wives, the seats of your fathers' gods, and the tombs of your forebears. Now is the struggle for all things." The Battle of Salamis was a chaotic, brutal collision of wood and bronze. The Persian ships, too numerous to maneuver, crashed into each other. The Greek triremes, lighter and more agile, rammed them, shattering their hulls. Xerxes watched this too. He set up another throne on another hill, Mount Aigaleo, overlooking the bay. He watched his fleet, the bridge that connected him to Asia, the lifeline of his army, turn into driftwood. The water turned red, just as the rocks at Thermopylae had. This time, the machine broke. Without a navy to supply the massive army, the invasion was doomed. Xerxes, fearful of being trapped in Europe, took the majority of his forces and retreated. He left a smaller army behind, which would be crushed the following year at Plataea. But the turning point wasn't Salamis. The turning point was the psychological pivot that happened at the Hot Gates. Thermopylae turned the Persians from invincible gods into butchers. And it turned the Greeks from squabbling city-states into a people with a shared martyr. The war ended. The years rolled on. The bones at Thermopylae were picked clean by birds and bleached white by the sun. But the Spartans have a long memory. They returned to the pass. They did not come to fight. They came to curate the narrative. They gathered the bones. They built a monument. It was a stone lion, placed on the hill where the final stand took place. A lion for Leonidas. And they began to carve the inscriptions. This is where history begins to bend. This is where the editing room of memory gets to work. There were pillars erected for the allies. There was a mention of the Peloponnesians. But the story began to contract. The 700 Thespians who stayed and died, they were mentioned, but their memory began to fade, like ink left in the sun. The Helots, the slaves who died alongside their masters, they were erased completely. They did not fit the narrative of the free warrior. The story was becoming a Spartan product. It was being polished into a diamond, hard, clear, and exclusive. A generation later, a man named Herodotus traveled to the site. He is known as the father of history, but he was also a master storyteller. He spoke to the locals. He gathered the oral traditions. He wrote down the numbers, the millions of Persians, the 300 Spartans. He knew, perhaps, that the numbers were exaggerated. He knew that millions was logistically impossible. But Herodotus understood something about human psychology. We do not want accuracy, we want truth. And the emotional truth of Thermopylae required impossible odds. If the Persians were just a large army, it was a battle. If they were a sea of humanity, it was a cosmic event. And so, the myth was forged. The 300 became the shorthand. It is a perfect number. It is small enough to be intimate, but large enough to be a unit. It suggests a brotherhood. We forget the 7,000 who marched there. We forget the Thespians. We focus on the nucleus. Centuries turned into millennia. The Roman Empire rose and fell. The Byzantines built forts on the same walls. The Ottomans marched through the same pass. The geography changed. Silt from the river pushed the sea back, so today the pass is miles wide. The narrow gate is gone. But the story did not silt up. It grew sharper. Why do we still tell it? Go to any military academy in the world today. West Point, Sandhurst, St. Cyr. You will find Thermopylae in the curriculum. It is taught as the ultimate example of force multiplication, how a small unit can use terrain to stop a large one. But that is not why it survives. We do not remember it for the tactics. The tactics, frankly, were simple. We remember it because it seduces us. There is a dangerous allure to the story of Thermopylae. It appeals to a deep, dark part of the human psyche that craves the beautiful death. It whispers to us that it is better to go down fighting than to compromise. It validates the idea of the last stand. We see it in cinema. We see the slow-motion violence, the perfectly sculpted abs, the stylized dialogue. We cheer for the suicide mission. But there is a trap in this story. When we worship Thermopylae, we risk forgetting the cost. We focus on the glory of Leonidas, and we forget the widows in Sparta. We forget that the Spartan system that produced these warriors was a totalitarian machine that enslaved thousands of fellow Greeks to support a caste of killers. We forget that the freedom they were fighting for was a very specific, narrow definition of freedom. Freedom for the strong to rule the weak. And yet, despite the complexity, despite the problematic politics of Sparta, the core of the story remains untouchable. It is the story of the ultimate no, the refusal to move, the refusal to bend, the choice to let the body break before the will does. It is the final epitaph that seals it. Back at the site, there was a stone plaque. The poet Simonides was commissioned to write the inscription for the Spartan dead. He did not write a poem about glory. He did not write about rage or blood or hate. He wrote 2 lines of distinct, terrifying modesty. Imagine standing there today. The trucks rumble past on the modern highway nearby. The statue of Leonidas stands in bronze, brandishing a spear. But ignore the statue. Look for the stone. Listen to the words as they would have been spoken in the ancient tongue. Ozein, Angelein, Lakedaimonios, Hoti, Te de Kemetha, Tois, Keinon Remasi, Pethomenoi. The translation has echoed through the corridors of the West for 2,500 years. Stranger, go tell the Spartans that here we lie, obedient to their laws. It is the word obedient that stops the heart, or in some translations, faithful to their word. They did not die because they hated the Persians. They did not die because they loved war. They died because they said they would. They made a contract with their city, with their law, and with themselves, and they kept it. The tragedy of Thermopylae is not that they died. Death is inevitable for all of us. The tragedy, and the triumph, is that they chose the manner of their death. They used their own destruction as a tool to shape the future. Leonidas knew that a living king was just a man, but a dead king, sacrificed on the altar of duty, was an idea. And you cannot kill an idea with a spear. So, when is death more useful than survival? It is when the story of how you died becomes the fuel for those who come after. The Persians won the ground. They walked over the bodies. They took the pass. By every metric of military logic, it was a Persian victory. But nobody wants to be Xerxes. 2,000 years later, we still want to be the ones on the wall. We still want to believe that if the odds were impossible and the darkness was closing in, we would have the courage to stand still. The wind blows through the valley of the Spercheios. The hot springs still bubble, smelling of sulfur and deep earth. The ghosts are gone, but the echo remains. Come and take them.